That's my favorite part. I'm not cutting it out. Okay. This is Tanya Pearson interviewing Alice Bagg on July 18th, 2015 for the Women of Rock Oral History Project at the Sophia Smith Collection. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, Tanya.
And so I've read your book, Violence Girl, at the risk of having you repeat everything that you wrote about in that book. I would like to know a little bit about your upbringing in East LA. If we could start with your relationship with your parents, and just kind of like growing up, the neighborhood that you grew up in, and move on from there.
Okay, so I grew up with my mom and dad and my half-sister, Yolanda. My parents were both born and raised in Mexico, and my father actually used to come over on a train and hop the rails, right, and come over to work and then go back to Mexico. And then he was a bracero for a while. There was a bracero program. My relationship with my father was sort of complicated because I was his only daughter, so he treated me like I was the queen, he would tell me, you can be anything you want to be. You can be the first woman president. At one point I told him I wanted to be a stewardess because when I was growing up in the 60s, being a stewardess was really glamorous. And he's like, no, you should be a pilot, or better yet, you should own the airline. So he was trying to, I think, instill the kind of confidence that most men of that generation were instilling in their sons. So I think he gave me a sense of strength. At the same time, he had a complicated relationship with him because he used to beat up my mother. He, I don't know why she took it, but she stayed in the relationship and she'd get her ass kicked from time to time. And as a young kid, my earliest memories is of witnessing abuse and being unable to intervene, or trying to intervene and not being effective, just basically being swatted out of the way. So there was a part of me that really hated my father for the way he treated my mother, and there was a part of me that loved him because of the way he treated me. I also had a complicated relationship with my mother because she was very nurturing, very giving, very altruistic, and I learned to view those traits as weaknesses because even though she was so giving, she was constantly having her ass kicked for being so nice instead of standing up and taking a frying pan to my father's head, as I thought she should have done. She would, just break down. And I also, over the years, I witnessed enough encounters between them that I could see that certain things she said were triggers for him. And I knew them, and I couldn't understand why she didn't know, if I just hold my tongue and don't say that last thing, I might not get my ass kicked, Yeah. And and then the cherry on top of that relationship was that at one point, I remember my mother, I asked my mother, why don't you get a divorce? And this was later. I was probably, adolescent by that time. And she said, I don't get a divorce because it's important for you that we stay together. And so I felt so guilty, They're staying together for me. This abuse is all being tolerated because of me. So, and my sister was 10 years older than me. So she was at an age where she could escape a lot of it. She wasn't in the house a whole lot. She'd spend time with her boyfriend, and she got married really early. So it was just me as a sort of referee. That's my early home life.
Yeah, it seems like when I read your book, you have that complicated relationship with both of your parents, but it seems like they were always very, very supportive of you and encouraging of everything you did. So I guess I wanted to ask, what was how did you feel about yourself at the time? Were you a confident kind of kid, because then you went to elementary school and were like bullied through
Right.
high school pretty much.
I think it's funny because I think nobody ever talks about like people talk about people who are insecure and have inferiority complexes, but I think I kind of had a superiority complex because I was told like, you're the queen, you're beautiful, you're strong, you're so smart, you're so talented. My dad was constantly telling me that. My mother also treated me like everything I needed, like, what do you want for breakfast, honey? Like, or what do you need? Whatever you need for school, we're going to get it for you. And, anything. Like, it was, I felt like I was the queen. So I think I went to school feeling like sort of entitled to, to come and rule my,
Your kingdom.
my queendom. So that didn't fly.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of friends. And the whole time that I didn't have friends, I just thought, they're just dumb. They don't realize they're in the presence of greatness.
Oh, you felt that way at the time while you were...
Yeah, I felt bad about not having any friends, but I felt confident that I was, like, I still felt good about myself.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I still felt good about myself. I still thought, people just, like, I think that's why I was able to, one of my stumbling blocks as I got older was that as I started to acquire English, I thought I figured that I was getting it much quicker than other people. And I noticed that people in East LA, some of the kids, as they were learning English, mispronounced it. So I was like, I made a point of like learning to speak it as clearly as I could and to learn more words, and I tried to use them, and because they weren't common in my home, I'd say like, your hair is very disheveled. So I was like trying to, have a big vocabulary, but not really knowing how to pronounce things. Or, in one of my bands later on, I have a song called "We Will Bury You," which I looked at the spelling of the word bury and I thought it's bury. So I was saying bury all the time because I just thought that was, people must be mispronouncing it. And I need to correct it. So I made all kinds of corrections, like calling, Sonny and Cher, Sonny and Chair.
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes sense, though.
Right.
I mean, we have some weird pronunciations in the English language.
Yeah, well, I actually, I have to tell you, because even though I was confident in who I was and my my ability to learn things and my ability to I got a lot of props from my music teacher at an early age. She would come into our classrooms once a week, and she'd put me in charge of like leading rounds or playing the auto harp or playing the clave or whatever. So I felt like, oh, this is my one moment to shine. But the rest of the time I was unpopular amongst the other kids. So it was a struggle to stay confident.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. And was assimilation like something that was important to your parents too? I know, because didn't you speak Spanish at home? There was no English at home, or was that something that was important to you when you went to school, and like having an extensive English vocabulary? Or
at home I was only allowed to speak Spanish. My father made it a rule. We mostly watched TV and listened to the radio in Spanish, and my mother cooked only Mexican food, and when we went on vacation, it was to Mexico, so we were very connected with our Mexican heritage. And when I went to school, I had a hard time. I remember I remember my first day in kindergarten just being stared at and being spoken to in English and not understanding what the teacher was saying. And she was pointing at me saying, I pick you to go and get the milk. And she kept saying the word pick, pick, pick. And in Spanish, it sounded to me like pica, 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 which is like poke, poke, poke.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, she wants me to go up there and she's going to poke me. So I was scared, and eventually I learned enough English to get by. I did have some struggles as far as like teachers being unable to pronounce my name and changing my name completely from Alicia to either Alicia, which, you know, to this day I still, you know, it's like, I'm not Alicia, I'm Alicia, or Alice, and you know, if my name is too hard to pronounce, then call me Alice Bag, because I think most people can handle that. But okay, what was I telling you about? What were you?
Oh no, just about if.
Oh, the assimilation part.
Yeah.
I think I knew that that English was important to be successful in the United States, or at least I was raised to believe like you have to know enough English to be successful at school, to be able to thrive in your chosen profession, but you also always have to keep your heritage. So I think there was balance. My father was very, I think he was a pragmatist. You know, he realized that I needed to learn certain things, but also was unwilling to just let me forget about my roots. So.
And you said, was that music teacher, was that your first introduction to music, or that you were musically inclined, or something that you at least enjoyed doing?
Well, as I said earlier, my father specifically was really encouraging. So I would make up songs, like most kids probably, you know, just walk around like making up songs about anything. And he thought I was just a genius. So he would take me downtown LA. There was a little booth, you know, like a photo booth, but you could actually make a recording and have it pressed into a record. So he would, when I'd make up songs, he would take me and I'd make little recordings, and he'd make records and bring them home, and you know, act it like it was a really cool thing. And when I started singing at school, actually, one of our teachers made a record with a choir, and I was on that. And then I think it was 5th grade that a company came in and started making bilingual cartoons, and they chose like 5 or 6 students to sing English and Spanish language lyrics to the different characters, and I was chosen as one of them. And that was my first job, was singing for these bilingual cartoons. I made $100, and it was more than my family paid on their monthly rent. So it was like, wow, I'm rich. So that's when I think the idea of like maybe I could be a singer like first entered
like
my mind.
As a job too.
Yeah, as a job.
Hobby,
yeah.
Make money doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about school. Were your schools the schools that you went to, like elementary, high school, were there mostly white kids?
No.
Were you? Because I didn't think
No.
you were a minority.
No, I mean, when I grew up in East LA. So East LA is mostly Latino, so, and mostly Mexican-American kids, you know. So my experiences were very limited with Caucasians, except for when I went to the doctor. The doctors were Caucasian. When I went to, when I had to go to places, you know, where there were authority figures, they were always Caucasian, and mostly men.
And were most of the teachers?
Most of the teachers, all the teachers. I don't think I had one teacher that was black. Everybody else was Caucasian.
Okay.
No, wait, I take it back. I did have one teacher named Miss Martinez, in 5th grade, Yeah. But most of them did not live in the community. Most of them came in and worked with us and then left to their, you know, suburban neighborhoods, and they weren't really in touch with what was going on in our neighborhoods.
See, at the risk of like jumping around all over the place, other questions keep popping into my head.
Please.
And if I'm like skipping something that's important to you, but I'm thinking about high school right now. Your Elton John obsession, Queen obsession, and kind of how you went from, like, you knew that you liked singing, you knew that it was something you were good at, And you mentioned in your book too that you hung out with like guys in bands, and your boyfriend was in a band, and you were obsessed with Elton John. So how did you go from being like a music fan, or you said, and I forget where you were or what part of the book it was, but that you were with a bunch of friends, and you kind of realized that you didn't want to like be a groupie. Maybe you should be the one making the music.
Right.
So, like, when did you start feeling like, oh, this is something that I could do or I could participate in, and I don't just have to be, like, a big fan? So that's kind of a huge question.
Well, let me go back to junior high school, which is when I first became exposed to glam, and I fell in love with it. And it was kind of a weird thing because not a lot of people in my school were listening to rock music, much less this specific kind of rock music that was sort of freaky by the standards of my school. So so I got into David Bowie and Elton John, and at the time I was starting to see myself as a weirdo, and I don't know how that happened. I think I just thought, I would probably dress funny, and as I said, I had a hard time socially. I didn't really get along with a lot of people. I was also overweight. I also had broken front teeth that, stuck out, and I was awkward. So I think the music sort of seemed like music for outsiders. Mm-hmm. And I became enamored with Elton John because I loved his music, first of all, and I loved the way he dressed. I loved that he was very showy. It didn't dawn on me that he was gay. I thought I would marry him.
I thought that was really fun.
And all the whole time that I was in junior high and high school, I never had a boyfriend because, I was in love with Elton. Mm-hmm. What else did you ask me about? Okay. Groupies, right? You asked me about groupies. I did, at that time, my connection to rock music, what I was seeing, I became one of those, nerdy fans. Should we wait for a second?
Yeah, probably for a minute.
Just repeat that.
Yeah. Oh, is he going in?
Yeah.
Okay, it's done now, right? If he's inside.
Yeah. So I was sort of a nerdy fan where I would, get all the latest rock magazines, read the articles, and find somebody who was interested and try and exchange trivia and see who knew more. And I became that way about Elton too. But the next step seemed to me to be a groupie, because the groupies were really the only women that were continuously featured in rock magazines as being close to the music. Every now and then you might see an article on, Susie Quattro or something, but those, were probably 2 or 3% of the content of a rock magazine. So most often you'd see, the rock star, the male rock star, having a sexual escapade with a groupie. So I started to think, okay, I really love rock music. I really want to be close to it. So my role is to become a groupie. And I started dressing that way and trying to get close to musicians. And a friend of mine who considered herself a groupie, invited, she invited me to go see, actually, I take that back. She didn't invite me. I met her at that show. Okay. And I met her at a show for a local band. And she told me, she was going out with one of the guys in the band. And she kind of challenged me, why don't you go out with the guitarist? And I followed up on that, and I realized that as I was having a conversation with the guitarist, that it was really all about him, and I was there to be a sort of to cater to him, to listen to his stuff, which is not bad, if you have, if it's a reciprocal thing where, you're exchanging information with someone. Yes, I'm interested in, what kind of pedals you use or what kind of amp you use. But there was never that kind of exchange. It was very one-sided, and I started getting bored, and I started to question why I was here to listen to this person instead of forming my own band. There was absolutely, I had been led to believe that I had some musical aptitude. So I thought maybe I should just do my own thing.
But there was just, oh, sorry.
Excuse me, I need to get a tissue because I'm having...
Post it somewhere. Secret link. Okay, so...
I'm sorry. The blooper reel.
But so there were no women in the scene at that time for you personally to like look up to or to emulate or say, oh, this person's playing in a band. The only person I can think of is you hung out with Belinda Carlisle a little. I don't know if she was like even in a band at the time or if she was just...
Well, I was in a band before Belinda, so yeah.
Oh, she wasn't even in a band when you guys were...
Well, you know what? She was... When we were friends, she had already... She had told me that she had been in the Germs, but I saw the Germs first show. So she had actually... She didn't play their first show.
Okay.
She was... she had, I think, mono at the time.
Yeah.
So she was
there
at home.
Like nobody else, and just the groupie women in magazines.
Yeah.
Like, those were the only people.
Yeah, no, the first and I kind of call her pre-punk. The first like woman that really inspired me to be in a band was Patti Smith, and I guess, some people probably put her in the category punk and maybe some see her as pre-punk. I think there was a transitional period there where some bands were changing their sound.
Yeah.
And
okay, just feel like I'm skipping around a lot. So
Okay.
like you did before, if you feel like you have to go back or that I'm missing something really important.
Well, I think the only thing that I think that you might miss is the fact that I auditioned for a band that Kim Fowley was putting together.
See, I was afraid to ask that question because of all of the... I didn't want you to think I was asking it because of all the stuff
That's going on right now, yeah.
So I'm like, maybe I should skip it. But
No,
I mean,
at the time, yeah.
Turned him down.
At the time, well, I didn't turn him down. He turned us down. I mean, I approached Rodney. He had a reputation for liking young girls. At the time, I thought he likes young girls meant he likes to hang out with young girls. I think I was just really naive, and I thought, like he offered me some French fries and was very sweet, so I thought like, oh,
How old were you then?
Probably 16 or 17.
Okay.
And I told him I had a band, and he put us in touch with Kim Fowley. Kim Fowley called my house and asked us to come and audition for a new band he was forming. And we went and auditioned, and he didn't like us. So what happened was that as he auditioned us in different combinations. So we would take like, a bassist here, a guitarist there, and try different arrangements. And if he didn't like you, just say, okay, next, go on out. So what was happening was a bunch of us were outside as we were being rejected, just kind of standing around talking to each other. And we became friends. And that's how we found our drummer originally. We were all rejects from this Kim Fowley audition. And we just thought, we don't need Kim Fowley. We can form our own band. So it was actually a really empowering event for those of us who were rejected, because we made friends with each other, and we'd later see these same women like coming around and hanging out at the punk scene. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's part.
And was he somebody that, like, you all seem to know who he was because of the Runaways?
Yes.
Like, he was seen as kind of a successful person, or...
He had a bad reputation even then, and he was seen as somebody who was manipulative. We didn't know to what extent. When I met him, I instantly disliked him. I thought he was full of himself. Even when he talked to me on the phone, it was like, I had just picked up the phone, and he's like, "Do you know who I am?" I was like, "Yes," So I thought, this man is, full of himself. He's calling my house, like, at least.
Yeah.
So, and over the years, I would see him at at punk gigs, but he, by most of the people that were, the creators of the early punk scene, Kim was not seen as anything other than like Svengali of the past. He was not. He never really came. I don't remember ever seeing him at the Mask. I never saw him at the Canterbury. I saw him at the Whiskey A Go Go. I saw him at the more mainstream clubs now and then. And he was usually like bad mouthing the people who were on stage because he couldn't have a piece of it. Because we didn't need him. At that point, like punk was already about empowering yourself, not having somebody make you or write your songs or lead you. It was all about like doing it yourself. So there was no place for people like Kim. And, a few people, I think, talked to him out of like, oh, he has, he has this background and he was important at one point. So out of respect, but not,
well, it sounds like you...
But as far as I was concerned, he didn't deserve any respect. I never liked him. I did have a boyfriend who joined the band that Kim was trying to put together. His name is Nicky Beat. He was a drummer, and Nicky couldn't stand Kim and would come home and tell me all the stuff that he would pull at rehearsal and how he would try and brainwash them and, treat them disrespectfully and try to break them down so that they would look for validation through him. And Nicky was older. He was, I believe, like 27 when I met him. So he wasn't... By that time, he already knew that he was a good drummer. He had already played in different bands. He didn't need Kim's validation. So I think he was, he immediately started talking back, and it was...
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you dodged a bullet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I have to ask, too, your parents, how did they react once you started becoming involved in the punk scene, dressing crazy, going out? It seems like you come from a fairly traditional household.
Yeah.
But they were always so supportive of you. I'm just wondering how they felt when you were going through this.
My parents were very supportive about, like, my dress, my being in a band. Like, a lot of times my bandmates would come over, so my family knew them. Sometimes we'd even practice in the living room. Mm-hmm. So they got to listen to punk rock, and they were fine with it. My friends were all, like, really nice to my parents, and my mother went out of her way to be hospitable. Like, she, cook for them. Like, you could not come to my house and not have my mother make a Mexican dinner for you. Mm-hmm. So my bandmates loved my family. And there was mutual respect. My parents went to a Bags show, and they were like, you never invite us, but we knew you were playing, so they showed up. It was a crazy show where things were being thrown around, and my father just got up on a table and started like clapping and dancing, which was really cool.
Great.
Yeah. So my parents were very supportive of my music. They were very concerned that I was going out that I had a boyfriend that was a lot older than me. So.
In your book, you talk about you got pregnant
Yeah.
by Nicky when you were young and had an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually thought that it was really touching because that seemed to have changed your relationship with your mother a little bit, because she was the one that supported you.
Yeah.
And that was like your secret, right? You never told your dad. And how old were you then? Were you still in your teens?
You know what? I don't know how old I was. I might have been 17 or 18. I was still
young.
No, well, I wasn't in high school. I was out by when I was 17. So so I'm guessing. I'm not sure what month it was, but I'm a November birthday, so it might have been 17 or 18. Okay. But yeah, my mother was really strong for me at that point, and she kind of told me, you need to have an abortion. This is, you're too young, and then she would turn, and say, or do you think you're ready to have a baby? You know, but she pretty much told me, no, you're not ready to have a baby. You know, but she also left a little crack open in case I had like strong feelings about it. But I was just like, no, please help me
Would your father not have been okay with an abortion?
I don't.
Were you religious family? Were they? Religious?
My father was not religious. What my father was very angry, and I think my mother, more than anything, was worried that what he would do to me, to her, or to Nikki, because he was a violent man.
Okay.
So I think more than anything, it was about that. So
did you feel closer to her after that, though, or was it like
definitely? I felt like so supported by her. I always felt close to my mother, even though I rejected a side of her personality that I felt was being victimized, and I never wanted to be a victim, and I think I saw certain traits in her that I associated with being a victim, and I didn't, how should I say it? I rejected that side of her, but I also saw that my mother was always there for me. You know, my mother's the one that like would pick me up if I was not feeling well at school, that would, you know, make me some yerba buena tea, which is like an peppermint herb tea, or spearmint herb tea that's supposed to cure your stomach ache, or, you know, we didn't have a heating pad, so she'd take an iron and put it on for a few minutes and then put a towel over it so I could have a heating pad, you know? And, I mean, she just did all kinds of sweet things for me. So I loved my mom. I just rejected a certain aspect of her.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about your post-high school, the forming of the bags, and when I read your book, you went to school consistently too. You went to college right after high school and did music at the same time, like formed the bags and playing shows.
I once I graduated from high school, I started taking classes at a community college. So I was just taking a few classes like as a hobby, you know, sort of like trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to be when I grew up. Yeah. At the same time, I was like actively pursuing music. I had friends who were taking guitar lessons, and I was taking guitar lessons too. So I think I always sort of felt like I have to I have to juggle these different plates. So I always tried to take classes while I was at home. As soon as I moved to Hollywood, I just totally threw myself into the punk scene. I stopped going to school. I partied day and night, went to multiple shows pretty much all the time, you know, like totally switched my clock around to be awake all night and sleep in the day and that kind of that didn't really allow for school or like having a normal job.
Yeah. Were you living with Nikki then? That's when you moved to Hollywood? Was that apartment?
I first moved to Hollywood with Nikki, and then when we broke up, I moved in with Shannon Wilhelm, who would later form Castration Squad. She was a fellow punk. And we also had another roommate named Sheila, who would later become a member of the Screamers. Mm-hmm. So.
And just can you like describe the scene at that time? Just what it was like. I think this comes up a lot, you know, retrospectively, thinking about punk or the size of shows, or it's like there were actually, you know, a lot of shows would just have like 30 people or something. And the scene was really small, but, you know, historically it becomes much bigger. But just, what it was like, what the shows were like.
Well, we used to say that there was like 100 punks that came to all the shows. You knew who they were. You like, you know, it was like my high school had like a graduating class of 100, 100 kids, right? So, and we knew everybody. And we also had aside from the clubs that hosted now and then punk night, there was the Mask, which was sort of a clubhouse where we'd go and we could go rehearse in the day or, work on projects with people during the day and then have shows at night. And a block away was an apartment building called the Canterbury, where a bunch of punks had rented apartments, and usually there were multiple punks in each apartment. So I'd say there were maybe maybe 30 people, 30 punks living at the Canterbury, and others that were nearby that were the constant members of the punk scene that were all at every show, involved in every way, from making zines to like taking photos to making flyers, distributing flyers, forming bands, creating artwork, creating costumes, being hairdressers that dyed each other's hair pink, or everybody was not in the same medium, but we were all like pushing the limits of creativity, so.
And when, I'm very interested in this, when you formed the Bags and, started playing shows, like when you played your first show, what was the general reception like? There were two women in the band when we started?
3. Oh, yeah, 2 others aside from me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was that an issue? Was that something that made people more interested in you at the time because there weren't as many like female-fronted bands or bands with women in it? Did anyone care at all? I mean, was it?
I think when the first like real local punk show that I saw was show at the Orpheum Theater that had as their opening band the Germs, and they had 2 women in the band. It was Donna Rhea playing drums and Lorna Doom on bass. So, and neither of them were like technically proficient. They were making sounds, and they were up there owning the stage. And to me, that's the message I took away. It's like, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to you don't have to play drums like Keith Moon to be up on the stage. So I think that was inspiring for me and Patricia, we were both at that show. Patricia would be my bass player. We had a guitarist who could play reasonably well, and I had by that point given up on guitar and become the singer. What happened is that we put an ad in the paper, and we decided we were going to wear paper bags on our heads. So I think the paper bags on our heads became more the focus than the fact that we were women. It sounded like, oh, this is kind of a weird band. They're going to play with bags on their heads. Yeah. So we really appealed to musicians that wanted to do more than play. They wanted to create, a band that was interesting and strange, and
it seemed almost like a little performance arty at the time with the bags. So I mean, we just thought it was fun. I don't think we even thought in terms of performance art, because I don't think I even knew what performance art was at that point. I just thought, oh, fun, let's do that. Let's let's keep our identities secret, and nobody will ever know we're in this band, because we'll always wear bags on our heads. Except then Darby ripping the bag off your head all the time. Doesn't.
Yep.
But that's a cool story to tell forever.
Yeah, no. It was, yeah.
But it's funny because, like, reading those stories, it just reminds me of, I'm like when I hung out with all the punks when we all lived in Providence, and it's like, that's something that my friend Mike would do. Except,
right.
It's funny, it's just.
I mean, I think the early punk scene was all about, like, just being fun, having fun, finding ways to like do something that hadn't been done before, and
it seemed like everyone was really supportive of one another for the most part.
Yeah.
Going to every show, just.
Well, there's something about being the weirdo in your neighborhood, and then finding a community that's all the weirdos in all the different neighborhoods that makes them, really serves as the glue that holds you together is this feeling of otherness. Oh, look, we found each other.
I have a question kind of about your on-stage personality, persona, but I also, like, we've just met today, so I don't want to assume that you're a certain way in the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But, so, your upbringing, just your father's violence, being how you were treated in school, you know, not speaking English very well and being kind of like picked on, or did that kind of dictate like the personality that you formed? I mean,
that dictated my personality, period. It's part of who I am. There's a part of me that definitely is Alice Bagg, and there's a part of me that can be very angry.
Okay.
And when I was on stage, it wasn't a character I'd created. It was a side of my personality that just emerged without my even being aware of it. Sometimes I'd play a show, and people would, you know, say, "Why were you? You know, what made you so mad?" And I'd think, I didn't realize I was, you know, projecting that. Or they'd say something, and I would totally like just not remember doing it, like just almost like a blackout. And there were times in my life where I've been really angry, and it's almost like a post-traumatic stress, I think, you know. I'm fortunate in that I had punk rock as a place where I could vent and sort of release this anger in a controlled way. I don't want to say completely positive, but definitely, you know, dancing like a maniac and yelling at people and doing that sort of thing is much more positive than like holding it all in and going out and killing somebody, which is sort of rage that I think I possessed. And maybe there are remnants in there. Like, I know recently my daughter we were at the market, and she was walking towards me, and a man was walking behind her, and he was talking to her, and she was like, no, you know, I don't, you know, just trying to get away from him. And he was pursuing her, and I was watching this, and he just walked up to me, and he looked at me, and I just said, "Get away from my daughter." And I said it in a way that he better be scared, because I could kill that motherfucker, you know? And that side is in me. And I try to keep it under there, but it's in me. And I, like, it's right under the surface. Yeah. Most of the time, it doesn't have to come out. Okay. But definitely it's something there that makes me feel strong, invincible, and because I feel like even if I put myself in a position where I come to physical harm, I'm not ever going to be a victim. I'm not ever going to let somebody hurt me or somebody I love. And they might, you know, they might get me in the end, but I'm not going down without leaving my mark on them. Yeah. You know, I think in my book I talk about like being followed by a car where, you know, I'm walking home and you know, I don't even have like enough money to take a cab, you know, so I'm like, I stop at a liquor store and I get a hot cup of coffee, and the guys are in the car and they're still following me and like yelling stuff at me. And I'm dressed, I used to work in a gym, so I'm wearing leotards and high heels and like a tiny little smock over it. So I probably look like, you know, to them, like a sex worker or something. Maybe not. I mean, it doesn't matter. I probably just look vulnerable. So I got the cup of coffee and I said, you know, you can do whatever you want to me, but at least one of you is getting their faces burned off by this cup of coffee. And I think that's how I feel. I feel like there is definitely a side of me that can be dangerous. But that side of me is there to protect me.
Yeah. Are you generally in regular life walking down the street like a pretty reserved
Yes,
person though?
I am.
Okay.
I'm pretty reserved, even when I I have knee surgeries. I had knee surgeries recently, so I don't walk my dog as often as I used to, but I walk my dog, and I usually have headphones on, and I have my own thing going on. I sometimes have to remind myself to, nod at the neighbors because I see them regularly. I know who they are.
Yeah.
But I also, I have a good, I grew up in a neighborhood where you had to be aware of what was around you. So if there's someone around me that's unfamiliar, I usually turn around and look at them and let them know I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm present. You're not going to sneak up on me. I guess I'm somewhat combative.
Okay. Scorpio, right? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, astrology.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because I'm also, I have this side of me that really wants things to be good, that really wants to connect with humanity, that really wants, to be at peace with everybody. But there's the side of me that realizes that there are predators out there.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, and just a little bit more about the bags. The bags lasted, about 4 years or something that you were a band?
No, less than that.
It's never as long.
No, let me see.
77
Oh, actually, probably about 3 years. About 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
The last part of it, we were really bickering a lot and not getting along, pulling in different directions. And by the time that we were filmed for The Decline of Western Civilization, we had lost our founding member, Patricia, and we were fighting with her legally. She was asking us not to use the name The Bags because she told us she had a copyright on it.
Was she just upset though?
I think she was just upset. I think we were all, I'm friends with her again, but it took I think I didn't speak to her for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
We were estranged for a very long time, and we recently reconnected. And I think we just decided, you know what? She has her point of view, I have mine, and we had a great time together. We were very, very close. We were best friends.
Yeah.
And when we started talking and just said, look, let's put that all behind us. Let's move forward. We realized we still have a lot in common, and we still really care about each other. And she lives in England now. She's married to Dave Vanian, and she came to visit recently and stayed with me. And it was like old times. I mean, we sat around and laughed about things that we did as teenagers. So it was wonderful. But I think the key is, to respect each other's point of views. She's always going to see it a certain way, and I will always see it my way, and it's okay. So that's how life is, right? Everybody has their take on it.
And your time in the bags, it sounds like touring just in general sounds like a very miserable experience. I don't think I've ever heard anything really good about touring. It's stressful, and it seems to just, you're in real close quarters with a bunch of people for an extended period of time. And it sounds like the bags, I think it was your last tour that you wrote about in your book was just not fun at all. Did that change your perspective about doing music forever, or as a job, or as something that would sustain you, or?
No, the tour didn't change my desire to create music. I think it really made me feel like the band was like we were a dysfunctional relationship, that either we needed to fix it or we needed to break up. And it became obvious to me at that point.
But it didn't change the way that you felt about making music or playing music?
No,
Okay.
I still wanted to make music.
Okay.
Yeah. I did, one thing that drove me away from the scene was the fact that people were getting hooked on hard drugs and dying. And that made me want to move away and just take some time to do other things. I really thought I was going to to be a lawyer, you know, and maybe just make music as a hobby at that point. But I wasn't able to. My friend Shannon kept recruiting me to play in her band, the Castration Squad, and pretty soon I was back into doing other bands. So.
How did you avoid the hard drugs?
Well, I'm not going to say I avoided them completely because I did do my share of them. But I think I had a really strong sense of self-preservation. I wanted to be in control, and being on drugs just was so risky. You know, you didn't know who was cooking up what. I heard of people like using, you know, putting strychnine in acid and like doing all kinds of crazy things, and I didn't want to be. I guess I was practical. I thought, you know, okay, I can drink. I know where that's coming from. So I was a heavy drinker for a while. But I avoided drugs because I didn't know what was in them. I didn't know where they were coming from, and I'd seen people overdose, and it just seemed like it was giving up too much control.
Yeah. And this is where I'm gonna get a little screwy because the timeline, but I really would like to talk about you went back to school and your time in Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like when you came back, that's when you started teaching and you kind of found that passion of yours.
Yeah, when I got out of, I majored in philosophy, again, because it has a lot to do with, like, looking at people's arguments, analyzing arguments, and I wanted to be an attorney. But when I got out of school, I got a part-time job immediately as a teacher's aide, and I realized that I really liked working with kids. Excuse me for a second.
Oh, sure.
So I really liked working with kids, and I worked as a teacher's aide for maybe a month or two, and then I saw an ad in the paper that said that USC was accepting applications for their accelerated teaching program, and I went in to check that out. I'm sorry,
We can pause for a second if you want.
my throat's just very dry.
Okay.
So I went to check that out. And I was accepted, and I started, they had an accelerated teaching program that put you in the classroom after 6 weeks.
Oh.
So I did 6 weeks of student teaching, and I was offered a job. And once I started doing that, I just realized that I had something to give these kids. I was hired because I was bilingual. One of the important things that I brought to the table was that I was bilingual. Then I also realized these kids are a lot like me. I can really serve this community in a way that other teachers might not be able to. But I realized after a while that it wasn't only part of the kids were Mexican American. A big chunk of them were Central American, and I didn't know that much about Central American culture. So I was sort of curious about Central American culture, and during that time, 84 through 86, there was a lot of stuff going on in Central America. The Sandinista revolution had happened. There was the FMLN was fighting an oppressive government in El Salvador, and Ronald Reagan was in office trying to do his best to keep communism from spreading throughout the hemisphere, and at the same time, because I was on an emergency credential, I was teaching with a credential that expired after a year because I hadn't taken all the necessary classes. So I had to take a certain amount of college units to get a new credential at the end of the school year. So I was in school, and I took a class that where the professor assigned Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And in it, Paulo Freire talks about this system he calls the banking method, where students are taught to become passive receptacles for information. Basically, they are receiving deposits as in a bank, right? You receive deposits of information that the student is then asked to regurgitate and not really process, just like take it in, spit it out. So the students become passive learners, and they're indoctrinated with the values of the dominant class, also turned into sort of just passive citizens, that will just accept whatever is deposited into them. And I knew that I had been taught that way, and I didn't want to do that to my students. I really felt like I'm in a position where I can make a difference. And I heard that Paulo Freire had been invited to work on the Sandinista literacy campaign. So I approached a professor and asked if I could do an independent study. I needed the units because I needed to be able to renew my credential. Luckily, the professor said, yes, write a paper on the literacy campaign, but I want you to do one other thing, and that is I want you to keep a journal of your personal growth during this experience. And I did, and I realized that was like I thought I was going there to help them, and really I went there to learn. I learned so much in that 1 month that I spent there. I lived with a Nicaraguan family, and the mother was a former guerrillera. So she was like this really strong feminist that had lived this experience where she was like fighting for freedom for her country from an oppressive dictator. And at the same time, some of her compañeros, some of the men that she was fighting alongside, were still treating her as, a second-rate citizen. And she was like, no, I'm not going to take this. I fought in the trenches with you guys. So she was all about empowering people in her community, about empowering her daughters. She had, it was an all-female household.
I know,
so,
I thought that was funny. It was a house full of women.
Yeah, and they were all like very much like cooperative as far as like taking care of the younger kids and taking care of the household, but also feeling like they had a place in their community where they could reach out and make a difference. So it was a really cool experience for me because I didn't have that here.
Yeah. And how much schooling?
Oh, shit.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, is that the,
Yeah.
They're pretty resilient.
It's
Really?
on.
Should I just put it here?
Yeah, that's
Is that
fine.
okay? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's still on.
Is it? Testing. Okay.
Okay. Crisis averted. When you came back to the States, you came back and you taught, like, were you then a teacher?
I was still, I was on an emergency credential for several years because I was working full time and taking classes at night, so I couldn't go full time. But I was, I had my own classroom. I was from the get-go. I was given a classroom, so I was able to take some of the stuff that I had witnessed in Nicaragua and bring it to the classroom. And most of it had to do with just teaching the kids why they were learning things and bringing in their own personal experiences and making them part of what I was teaching them. For example, asking them about their lives, writing it, and so that they understood that their ideas, their experiences could be text, and then taking the text and breaking it down into keywords and into syllables and then into phonemes, going from concrete to abstract instead of abstract to concrete.
Yeah, I love in Violence Girl. I don't know the exact quote, but you say that teaching people to read and write is a revolutionary act, which is
It can
totally
be.
agree with that. Yeah.
It can be a revolutionary act. It can also be an act of indoctrination. If you're banked into and if you're taught that your opinions don't matter. I mean, the thing that's missing in our educational system right now, or at least here in Los Angeles, is that kids are drilled. They're taught to like quickly learn the alphabet, learn the sounds, spit them back. I'm going to time you. And there's not enough emphasis on like, you know, what do you think about the passage we're reading? Does this make sense to you? What does your partner think? Let's listen respectfully to another person's opinion. Let's discuss the content.
Yeah.
There's not enough emphasis on critical thinking. It's more about like just learning the mechanics.
Yeah.
And I think that's detrimental. I think that does turn kids into passive learners, passive citizens, and it doesn't teach them the value of listening to other people, the value of dialogue and discussion.
So you're like a subversive teacher.
Yeah, I think I was. I was
Yeah.
a subversive teacher. I'm not I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I feel like writing books and talking to people about it is a way of like, not so much, and I don't even think of it top down like I used to. It's more like, we learn from each other. So.
When did you stop teaching in a classroom?
I taught here in Los Angeles for over 20 years, and then I moved in 2006. I moved to Arizona with my husband, who had been transferred there for work, and I lived on the outskirts of Phoenix in a desert area called Cave Creek, and I didn't teach for a while. I taught 1 year while I was there. And I was fortunate because the principal was a longtime teacher, and she really agreed with my methods. But the stuff that was happening in the classroom was a lot of like rote memorization, and there was a lot of pressure to spend a big chunk of our day testing kids, which I feel robs the children of valuable instructional time. So, but, there was this like built-in accountability, but you were only accountable for teaching them to memorize.
Yeah.
You were not really accountable for teaching them, things that they would take with them throughout life, like self-confidence. And
And I feel like I just missed, when did you get married? And
Oh,
you had your daughter,
let's see. When did I get married? I think we just had an anniversary, 7/11/97
Okay.
is when I got married. And we had our daughter in 94.
Okay.
So, and we met 2 or 3 years before that.
Were you always still doing music? Was there a period where you just were not doing music or playing in bands at all?
I've always done some kind of music. When I had my daughter, I tried to just be a mom for the first few years when she was young, because I felt like I don't have time. I was trying to it's a serious commitment to work with somebody, to want to spend time with them, to want to like nurture them. And then at a certain point I had to go back to work too. So I had I had these kids that I wanted to do right by, and give them as much as I could, and then come home and give as much as I could to my family. I felt like I don't have time to be in a band. But what happened is that I found myself very depleted in the joy that comes from creating for yourself, and nourishing my own soul. So, so I did even then I formed a band. It was called Stay at Home Mom.
Oh,
and it was
really?
and it was
I didn't know that.
it was a play on Stay at Home Mom, and it was because I felt like I was ticking inside, like I'm going to explode if I don't find a release for my creativity. So.
And do you feel like as a woman,
I'm looking for tissue again. I'm
okay,
sorry,
sure.
allergies.
No, that's okay.
Oh, there
That's
we go.
it. It's just behind
No,
that.
it's just more footage to add to the.
To the blooper reel. Okay, here you go.
Pretty good. Kind of like having to choose between career, because you were teaching creativity, and wanting to be a mother, do you think that having to make those kinds of decisions, like to stay home or to work, are like exclusive to being female? Like, if you were a guy in a band, do you think that that question would have the same weight that it has because you're
No.
All right, good. Neither
No,
do I.
I think I think the pressure automatically goes back to the mother, right?
Yeah.
Like it's and if you're a man and you decide to go back to work, you're being a provider. You're fulfilling the traditional roles. But if you're a woman, you're neglecting your role as a nurturer. You know, so I think there is like social pressure for the woman to find a balance between being a nurturer, and if you happen to also, if you know, to be in a household that requires you to work too, you really have to find a way to split yourself. I think at some point, I think my husband saw what was happening to me. I was getting sick a lot. I actually went into the hospital and I thought I was going to die. And I think a lot of it was just depression at not having an outlet. And I think I finally just told my husband, I need to do music. And he said, yes, you know, go, you know, I can take over, even if it's just one night a week where you go and rehearse and feel like you're an individual, you know, like you have a life of your own, a creative life you're not just defined as a mom or a teacher. Mm-hmm. And that realization was life-changing for me. I tried not to ask for help. You know, I really did not want to. I felt guilty. You know, I knew my husband was working all day too, and he was doing his share of housework. And but the fact that he stepped up and said, yes, go do your thing, and it was really good for me. So I'd recommend it to all, you know, any women that are in this position where they feel like they have to give up something they love. Mm-hmm. It's not, you know, and I'm sure other people have described it as like, you know, putting the mask over your own face, your oxygen mask, giving yourself enough so that you have something to give back.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was going off of the kind of like motherhood question. But you also play, like, punk music and, like, right now have blue hair.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, just, like, as a mother, or as you get older, what are people's reactions to you? Or, like, other mothers, you know, I mean, your daughter goes to school and...
Well, when my daughter was younger, I tried to dress conservatively when I went in to speak to the principal or, you know, when I had a conference with a teacher or something, because I didn't want them to make assumptions about me. And so I guess I kind of had a costume, you know. And the same thing goes for my teaching. There were many years where I had my little teacher outfits that were kind of costumes of what I imagined a teacher would dress like. So, and I tried not to let anybody at my workplace know that I had this completely separate life, because I wanted to be able to be as crazy and as wild as I wanted to be in my secret life as I was in my profession, and, you know, and be able to be taken seriously in my professional life. Mm-hmm. So I led a double life.
Yeah.
For a long time. And then when my daughter got older, she's like, oh, I don't care what you do, Mom. You know, do whatever you want. And I realized she wasn't embarrassed by my appearance, and that was liberating for me. Mm-hmm. She just, you know, she thought I was dork no matter, you know, whether I had brown hair or gray hair or blue hair or pink hair. She was still like a teenager and still wanted me to walk behind her if we were someplace public, you know, like pretend you're not with me. So.
And now you are writing books. You just wrote another book, or another book just came out
Yeah.
about your
It's
time in
about,
Nicaragua,
my
right?
time in Nicaragua. It's actually based on the diary that I kept while I was there. And I added little sections. I'm very influenced by For Dummies books. So this particular book has little sections that allow me to add sidebars of like my current views on a subject that I wrote about when I was, 26 or 27. So the book is in a younger voice and is maybe a more naive voice, and so I need the sidebars to express my more mature point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That's really interesting layout.
Thank you. I didn't know how to do it. And it is a book that I self-published. I decided that part of self-publishing, that the act of self-publishing was part of the message, so.
And you do a lot of panels about women in rock music or Chicana women in rock music. Do people ask you to participate in those a lot?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I think a lot of my music lends itself to that. I've written a lot of songs about situations that are, common among women. I have a song called Modern Day Virgin Sacrifice that I really like, that it's about how young girls are, they're used to power, the machine that creates insecurities in women and then sells them back the cure for that insecurity, whether it's deodorant or hair dye or makeup or, whatever it is that they see, diet pills, whatever insecurity they've managed to create in women, then, they can monetize the cure and sell it back to them. And
yeah, that one's on your SoundCloud too.
Yeah,
That's pretty much how you get your music out now. You have and I read somewhere, I read some interview that you put things on SoundCloud and but you can't find any Bags music on. It's really hard to find. I was searching for it.
There's a Bags album, and the Bags only recorded 4 or 5 tracks, and actually I'm lying, because some of the stuff was recorded at the Decline, at the movie taping. So, but as far as studio tracks go, we don't have a lot of studio material. So there's an album called All Bagged Up that has a mixture of studio material and live material, but I think it is hard to find.
Yeah, and then. Oh, I know. I'm like, what did I want to know next? I would like to know was the title of this project. It's right now. It's just called the Women of Rock Oral History Project, and we, I have interviewed a genderqueer person, and the American Studies Department was just asking, well, why haven't you interviewed any women of color yet? And I'm like, well. I've only interviewed the people who have said yes to me and responded. So, but just how do you feel about the categorization, women in rock?
How do I feel about that?
We'll see, this isn't my interview, but I have, some people find it very, offensive, and they strongly dislike the title. So I've started doing this thing where I refer to male bands or male-fronted bands as male-fronted bands, or men in rock, so that it makes it equal. So that it's okay that this is a Women of Rock Oral History Project, because I think as long as you're not referring to everything else as the dominant, and then this is the weird,
the fringe,
women are the anomaly. So. Yeah, I don't know, just your thoughts on the women in rock category or how women are represented in rock music or treated? Like, you've been doing it for a long time. Have you seen kind of an evolution, or have things gotten better? Have things gotten worse? Really,
I
any
think
thoughts?
definitely things have gotten better, and we still need to have to make up for lost territory. We need to continue to focus on women and give them equal time. Find a way to give them equal time. I don't know. It's way better than it was when I was, when I first started playing music. We really didn't have, there were no. There was one all-girl band, and we called them girl bands, right? We don't even use that term anymore. So, it was Fanny, and they were women.
She lives down near Smith. She has a school down.
Oh, really?
June Millington. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, there were the Shags too. I guess you could,
Mm-hmm.
there were different. There were a few women musicians and female bands that were kind of seen as curiosities almost.
Yeah.
You were not. You wouldn't even think to say Fanny without saying it's a girl band.
Yeah.
Whereas now I think you could say L7 and just say it's a rock band. Without. So I think things have changed, but I don't think we're there yet, and I think it's valid to use. When you approached me and said it's focusing on women, I was much more interested and much more likely to make time to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
That's good to know. So now I can say Alice Bag thinks it's fine.
Well, I think it's fine. I don't know. I'm also kind of old school,
thank you. I don't know. Is there? I mean, I know that there's a ton that is going to be left out because I'm cramming your life into 1 to 2 hour interview. But is there anything that I have left out that you want to talk about, or do you?
Oh, I don't know.
Any genius closing?
Genius closing thoughts.
Anything quotable?
Boil it all down.
Yeah. More women of color, more. I just want to see more inclusion.
Well, I do have one other question because you just said more women of color. I'm writing an honors thesis, using these interviews, and the American Studies department was giving me a hard time because I haven't included a chapter about women of color in punk music, in rock music. But I was I don't want to be another white person writing about the expense. So I just said, you should read Alice Bag's book, and she wrote another book. You know what I mean? I don't feel like I'm an authority on that. I can write about women in rock music all day because I play music, and that's why I'm doing these interviews, because I care. But what do you? I guess I don't know how many. I don't know why there aren't as many women of color why there aren't as many women of color who play punk music.
There are. There are.
That was my question.
There are, but they're not.
And where are they? Or is it?
They're probably in a part of town that you don't go to,
Yeah.
But they're there, and I think that's I think it's great if you interview people that I don't think you need to be like me to interview me. I think you can interview me and you can ask a lot of questions that would probably we could find points of connection, things that we have in common. And I think there need to be, as you said, it's not just whether you identify as male or female. We're just musicians, right? Yeah. So some people prefer not to be identified by gender at all, and I think that's fabulous. But there's still a shortage of female representation. There's still a shortage of queer representation. There's still a shortage of people of color.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Were there people of color playing
Yes.
in the scene at the time? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're kind of like the figurehead from that era now. It seems like sometimes they just will pick one person, kind of like how Kathleen Hanna is like the riot girl
Right.
figurehead, you know what I mean? So I was like, were there more, or was it?
We're just the one. I'm just the one, like, you know, writing books and like going,
Yeah.
hey, I'm here. Don't forget me. Because if you don't do that, then people will not write about you, and your history will be forgotten. And that's what's happened traditionally to women, is we've just been written out of histories, and especially, you know, women of color, queer women of color.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was my last.
Yeah.
That was my. I don't have anything good to end with. Well, I mean,
That
I guess
is-
I could
yeah.
just say.
That
thank
is
you
good.
very
I think
much.
what
Yeah,
you're
you
what.
think so? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to
Yeah,
go
everyone
out
was
and
very
interview more
excited. They're
people.
like, oh, Alice Bag, okay. Like, so there's one. I don't know. I feel like they want me to like fill a quota or something too, which I also kind of don't.
Well, I know you're probably not for quotas, but if you're aware that there's a lack of
Yeah.
women's representation, you should also be aware that there is a lack also of people of color and queer representation. So if you can find those people, and if you can't find them, I'll tell you where to find
Okay,
them.
yeah.
But because I think they should be interviewed.
No,
you know?
networking has. I mean,
Yeah.
I've met people from just doing interviews, and they've hooked me up with other people too. So
Yeah, and as long as you're like trying to, your objectives are egalitarianism, right? You're trying to find.
trying to enrich the historical record.
Yeah.
And I want you all to be remembered.
Yeah.
Forever.
Thank you.